For this chapter, we'll be using UV editing tab a lot, but first let's talk about managing texture data because we need to know what to do when we are moving our textures to different folders or changing the names. For this lesson, I prepared a model with few textures, and let's start with what's going to happen when we put the textures that are already used in the material to the different folder. So you can see that we have all textures next to the blend file for this lesson and an empty folder. Let's drag all the textures to the folder and come back to Blender. After changing the viewport shading, which will refresh the textures, the whole mesh became pink because the files were moved. Textures were not saved into blend file, so we just lost the texture location reference. In general, if your model is crazy pink and you didn't put any texture like that on it, it means that the textures are missing. We can select one of the textures and press N in the shader editor to see where Blender is looking for the textures. So now it's trying to find the textures in a different place. We can fix it by going to File, External Data, and Find Missing Files. The window will open and we need to go to the folder we put the textures in. And they're working again. So after moving textures to the other place on our hard drives, we can easily just find the right folder and our files. So it was a relative location of files, starting with location next to our blend file. The second method is the absolute path, which starts somewhere on your hard drive. It might be useful when you have a folder with many textures to use for different projects. If we want to move our blend file somewhere else and still be able to use the textures, we need to go to File, External Data, and Make Paths Absolute. We need to save the file, and now we'll try to move the file to the desktop again and open it. And our textures are still there because we have the whole path to them starting with C drive. And that's a really long path. Unless you don't need a library with textures, it's better to keep files relative to the blend files. This way you can just zip the folder with the blend file and textures and send it to someone and it will work. Before talking about another way of saving the files, let's bring back the project file to the folder with textures, open it, and change all paths to relative. If you want to send only the blend file to someone without packing the textures separately, you can go to File, External Data, and Pack Resources. Let's save the file, and we can see that the file got bigger because the textures are embedded into the file. Let's delete the texture files from the folder and open the project again. We can see that they're still there and the path is grayed out because they're no longer somewhere on the hard drive, but they're in the blend file. Next to the texture name in the shader editor, we can see a small icon showing us that the textures are packed into the file. If we want to unpack them and make them separate again, we need to click on this icon or go to the File, External Data, and Unpack Resources. And a dialog window appeared with some options. We can use the files in the current directory or use files in the original location, but there's also information that they will be created if necessary. We can also overwrite them, so if you would have the textures in the project folder, they would be overwritten, or we can remove the pack. Let's select the first option to just write those textures next to the blend file. And then we can see the location of the files once again. We can also turn on the options to automatically pack resources into the blend file, but it should be used when necessary, because the file sizes might get crazy. Managing textures location is also important for texture painting, what we'll do later in the course. But we need to know how to, after a long painting process, do not lose our progress. Let's go into the Texture Paint tab and create new empty texture and draw something. And in the shader editor, which I quickly add by dragging from the corner of the viewport, we will add and connect the texture to the hammer. And well, it's not a masterpiece, but it will do. Now we're saving the file and we want to close Blender and we're getting a dialog box. Imagine working a few hours and not getting this message and waking up next day to see that our files are not there. Thanks to this message, we can just save the file and our painted masterpiece will be in the blend file, and next time we'll open Blender, it won't be missing. If we make any changes to it, we need to save it again. The little indicator that the file was modified is this tiny star next to the image dropdown in the image editor. So we saved the day and our texture too. I hope that you now understand how Blender is managing the texture files and it won't cause any problems in the future.